Aloha guys, Dr. Tom Walker coming back at you. Today we're going to start talking about our very first system of the body in anatomy, and that is the integumentary system. Now, most of us have heard of the digestive system or the reproductive system or the immune system, but I venture a guess that few of you have heard of the integumentary system, unless you've seen it in the previous videos I've done. But this is the first one we're going to talk about, and it only has one organ in it, and that is the skin. But it's a very, very important one. Okay, functions of the integumentary system. Serves as a mechanical barrier. Keeps out bacteria, pathogens of all sorts as long as it's intact. Protects internal structures, organs, and so forth. Participates in the immune response. Acts as a gland for vitamin D synthesis. Vitamin D, guys, is actually a hormone. It's so important that we have a very complex system in our skin that produces vitamin D when we're exposed to sunlight. So no, sunlight is not the terrible enemy that the dermatologist made it sound like it is. Certainly it has problems if you get too much. Performs excretory function, our sweat glands. Performs a sensory role, because we have an enormous amount of sensors and free nerve endings in our skin. And helps regulate body temperature. So it's extremely important. The skin is the largest organ in the body, weighs 6, 7, or 8 pounds, something like that, depending on how fluffy you are. Okay, the structure of the skin. It basically has two parts, but the way they catalog it or categorize it here, it has three. The outer layer is called the epidermis. Epi means on top of. The epidermis, as you can see on our label here, is this part here. Below the epidermis is the dermis. Here's the dermis. How do we know? Well, because it says so right here. And then it has the subcutaneous layer. Now, if you look at this, guys, you'll notice that all the structures are basically in the dermis and the subcutaneous area. This is stratified squamous epithelium. We talked about that recently. And these skin cells are produced down here by mitosis, like we spoke about. And then they work their way up over time, and eventually they die. And the outermost layer is dead skin. And it's continually sloughing off. That's what they call it. And a lot of ordinary house dust, I mentioned this before, it's dead skin from the people who inhabit the area. Okay, what are the parts? Epidermis, dermis, subcutaneous. Accessory structures are hair cells, sweat glands, oil glands, nerve endings. It gets its blood flow here here's an artery and a vein. They extend up into the dermis, but they don't go all the way up into the epidermis. Okay? There are actually a number of layers in the epidermis. We're only going to talk about two, but there's about 7 or 8 as I recall. Stratum germinativium, sorry, the deep ones, germinate just like when seeds grow. That's where these skin cells are forming from. And then they move towards the surface. Stratum corneum, this surface layer composed of dead flattened cells that slough off. There's that word, slough. So they form deep in the epidermis, and then they work their way up over a period of weeks. The primary protein that's in skin cells is keratin. Keratinization is the protein keratin makes skin cells hard, flat, and water resistant. Keratin is also in hair and nails. It's a very common and important protein in the body. So we're only going to talk about these 2 layers of the epidermis, but there's actually a number. I'm thinking there are 7. Of course, there was a time that I knew that. Okay, the dermis lies under and supports the epidermis. It's quite a bit thicker and larger. Sits on the subcutaneous layer or hypodermis. Embedded with accessory structures, includes blood vessels that nourish the epidermis. So again, the blood vessels don't go up into the epidermis, but the nutrients and oxygen and so forth diffuse as it travels up back and forth there. So epidermis, little tiny thin vital layer. Next is the thicker layer at dermis with a number of structures, and then the hypodermis, or the what else did they call it? The subcutaneous layer. That's where all the fat's at, guys. So If you're one of these individuals that has a small degree of fat in the subcutaneous layer, they're the ones that they're real cut and lean and ripped, and veins pop out. And unfortunately, a good bit of that is genetically determined. Now, there's people that argue that with me, but I know for a fact that a good bit of it is. And I don't say it just because I'm not one of them, although the skin tells a story, reflects disease processes of the body. It most certainly can. Drug reactions can be reflected in skin changes. The skin responds to chronic irritation. The skin mirrors your stress level. We've all seen people like me who are type A type people. When they get PO'd, their skin starts turning red. Look like they could fry an egg on their head. Now we come to the subcutaneous layer. Tissues that lie beneath the skin. Highly vascularized. That's actually where those blood vessels were, and then they sent branches outward up into the dermis. Two main roles. Its fat insulates body from extreme temperature changes. Its connective tissue anchors the skin to the underlying structures. Some of that fat's vital, guys, but a lot of us have, shall we say, more than our share. Skin drugs and chemicals. Skin can absorb many chemicals, the transdermal patches and that sort of thing. Drug delivery system, hypodermic injections, of course, getting shots. Transdermal patches like nicotine patches, that sort of thing. Intradermal injections like tuberculosis or allergy testing, where they just barely insert the needle, just tiny under just the upmost layer of skin. Or you can have various topical drugs and medicines that can be applied through cream or oil. Also, you got to be careful because you can inadvertently absorb toxins through the skin also. So you got to be careful. Skin color is determined by genes, physiology, and sometimes pathology. What do you mean? Well, there's President Kennedy, John F. Kennedy, had Addison's disease, which is an adrenal insufficiency, which you'll learn about that later. But he had that causes you to have a bronze skin. And it looks healthy. In fact, the press used to report on how John F. Kennedy looks so vibrant and dynamic with his tan. It was actually because he had Addison's disease. Okay, dark pigment is melanin, secreted by melanocytes in the epidermis. That's what gives people their skin color. If there are a variety of, they say melanocyte malfunctions, we'll go with that. Albinism, you've seen that, people and animals that don't have any pigment in their skin and they're just white. Vitiligo, patchy areas of very white skin. And of course, it shows up a lot more on a dark-skinned person. Moles, okay. We also have keratin, yellow pigment in it, but it says the presence of melanin overshadows keratin in most individuals. This also is what determines hair and skin and eye color as well. Physiological changes of skin: blushing, blood vessels dilate when you're embarrassed. Pallor, when you turn pale. Blood vessels, as you might guess, constrict. Pathological changes. This is real important, guys. If you have a problem with oxygenation, you can experience cyanosis. The lips and the nail beds will start turning blue. And that's an important sign. What's that tell you? Hey, this dude needs more oxygen or there's going to be a real problem. For example, someone suffering with a bit of a heart attack or some other problem, or just not able to breathe properly, will start exhibiting cyanosis. If there's problems with the liver, you can often get jaundice or yellowing of the skin and the eyes. The whites of the eyes will turn yellow. There are a number of reasons that will do that. I don't want to go into bilirubin right now, but just to say problems with the liver. Bronzing, melanin overproduction, it doesn't say, but when we go over the endocrine system, we'll talk about Addison's disease. Ecchymosis is the medical term for bruising. So ecchymosis is the medical term for bruising. It's blood that's leaked out under the skin. It can be seen through there. That's what makes a bruise. Accessory structures. There's basically two main ones, and that's hair and nails. We're talking about hair detect insects, protect eyes, keep dust out of the lungs. Hormones affect growth. Let's see, melanin influences the color of hair. Hair arises in the epidermis, you can see here, has a bulb and then it grows up through. They also have a little tiny erector pilia muscle. So yes, hair can stand on end, indeed. Cosmetic role, okay. There's also usually an oil gland, a sebaceous gland, associated with a hair shaft too. Skin, guys, is extraordinarily complex, much more so than you might think. Much more so. Just a little postage stamp size area has got an enormous number of sweat glands and nerve endings and things like that. The entire surface of our body is covered in hair, except the palms of our hands, the soles of our feet, and certain aspects of our genitalia. But the rest of it, it's very, very small and tiny, but yeah, we have it over our entire body. The nails are an important accessory structure, made up of the free edge of the nail body and the nail root. The lunula, I'm sorry, it's been a while, shows nail growth. It's the one, it looks sort of like a half moon, thus the lunar origin of the word. The cuticle. Conditions affected by oxygenation of the blood can show various problems. In other words, you can tell sometimes some pathological problems going on by the appearance of the nails. Basically, they protect the tips of the fingers and toes from injury. They're like little splints, and they do quite an excellent job of it. But the thickness of the nail, the color of it can give an idea about underlying health of a person. The angle of it, believe it or not, the nail body actually comes off, this drawing is incorrect, at a slight upward angle. And if it's flat, that actually is indicative of some underlying problems. Glands in skin. Basically, there's sweat glands and oil glands. Sebaceous glands are the oil gland. They secrete the oil in the skin called sebum and the hair. There's a bunch of them. As I said, most of the hair shafts have a sebaceous gland associated with it. We also have a very large number of sweat glands. That's the green ones here. Or sudoriferous. Here's the word for it. Sudoriferous glands. Now notice that these all originate down the dermis, but then they project up through the epidermis. Sweat glands cool us, but they also are a form of detoxification. Okay, there's two kinds of sweat glands, sudoriferous glands. There's apocrine glands and there's eccrine glands. The apocrine glands are affected by sex hormones. And they're in the armpits and the groin area. And it's one of the reasons why we feel the need to use deodorant, because they have that certain smell to them. Eccrine glands are all the rest of the sweat glands, and they're critical for temperature regulation. Very important. When the body secretes that sweat, as it evaporates, it carries heat away. It takes heat to evaporate the sweat, and so that removes heat from the body, which is good. That's what we want it to do. Now, there are two kinds of modified sweat glands. The mammary glands, the female breast that secretes milk, is a modified form of sweat glands. And even more probably shocking is the glands that secrete earwax in our ears. The ceruminous glands are a type of modified sweat gland. Earwax is called cerumen, by the way, guys, is the actual medical term. Body temperature. The temperature has to be maintained in a very narrow range, guys, from the low 90s to the mid 100s, or we'll die. And of course, the skin plays a big role in that. I'm going to try to finish this up. I don't know if we can or not. Metabolism is where heat's produced. Blood disperses the heat through the body. Most heat's produced by the muscles, but some by the liver and endocrine glands. It's affected by food, hormones, physical activity. Heat loss, most of it through the skin, but some of it through the lungs also, by breathing it out, see. Yeah, we're not going to finish. Okay, that's all right. We'll pick it up the next time. All right, guys. Read back over this, watch it, learn, do it. We'll see you next time, and we'll finish this up. Dr. Tom signing off.